Since the Industrial Revolution, humanity flourished. Meanwhile, the environment is having huge shifts as well. Resources is being used rapidly, land rights is being argued through people. Today, we're going to focus specifically on the environmental injustice and indigenous land rights in California. The earliest environmental injustice to occur in California was the loss of Native American lands during Spanish colonization in the 18th century. Environmental injustice in California can also be traced to the farm workers' fight for the implementation of workplace protections, including protection from toxic pesticides, organized by Cesar Chavez in the 1960s. And these are the topics we're going to focus on. When we talk about water in California, the first thing we're going to think about is drought. Yeah, it became a popular topic in recent years. Indeed, California has never been this dry before, but how come? First, let's look at the water usage in California. As you can see, we spend majority of the water on agriculture just to satisfy huge population. Despite these agricultural lands destroyed most natural habitats and caused severe flood and soil erosion. Then, when we look at the indoor use, it is hard to believe that toilet actually use more water than shower. One simple press will cost 3.5 to 7 gallons of water, based on which toilet you're using though. You might feel that we have adequate water supply when you look at these numbers. In fact, we don't. The state and much of the West, which is where we are living, relies heavily on snowpack each winter to resupply surface water streams and lakes. When surface water supplies are low, hidden water supplies beneath the surface in aquifers or groundwater are drilled to make up the shortfall. Right now, California is experiencing severe drought in recent decades. Due to the massive demands from farming, less water is being transported to cities, and most of this water is being used to watering lawns and city vegetation. Also, incredibly, food waste is also a huge cause of water waste. Despite of water, humans are using resources as if tomorrow is the end of the world. According to BBC, that if everyone on the planet consume as much as the average US citizens, Earth 4 to 5 Earths would be needed to sustain us. And this is not enough. Pollution possesses another environmental injustice in California. Ironically, California has 8 of 10 most polluted US cities. Los Angeles won the first place without any doubt, due to its worst famous traffic in California, perhaps in the whole world. And where do you think that comes from? Cars. Millions of vehicles produce massive amount of carbon dioxide into the air, causing air pollution. Industrial factories discharge large amount of sewage into rivers, lakes, and oceans, causing water pollution. Large amount of sewage into, large numbers of farmlands cause soil erosion, which leads to runoff that includes toxic substances from pesticides, resulting in soil pollution. Furthermore, most of this pollution leads to another serious side effect: climate change. As we talked about in air pollution, burning of fossil fuel release carbon dioxide and green gases into the atmosphere, damage ozone layer. This allows more sunlight into the surface, raise the temperature to shift the climate. This sounds very familiar, and yes, it is what's happening right now at California. Another important factor is that many people didn't realize is deforestation. It is the removal of a forest or stand of trees where the land is thereafter converted to a non-forest use. When the trees were cut down, the water cycle within the ecosystem is stopped. As no more evaporation occurs, no clouds would form, eventually the rain will disappear. As a result, the original climate would be changed drastically, for example, into a desert. This would lead to a series of problems such as species extinction, habitat destruction, and ecosystem collapse. As you can see in the picture, the effect is pretty wild. A look to the future. There are some solutions to the environmental injustice in California. First of all, we can increase public environmental awareness by maybe adding more environmental classes to the schools, and in this way, so we can raise the public environmental awareness. And secondly, we can create more environmental protection organization. And third, we can find new energy sources rather than fossil fuels, such as solar energy or wind energy. There are also some ways that we can address climate change, such as maybe reduce the climate pollutions or we increase renewable electricities. These are all doable, it's just based on how we're gonna act and how are we have the passion to solve this problem.
In 18我怎么回事？我这个嘴呸！烦死了。In 1785, the Treaty of Hopewell was signed in Georgia, the largest state at that time, placing the native Cherokee under the protection of young United States and setting boundaries for the land. Not only did the government want Native Americans to give up their land, they also encouraged them to become farmers. In the early 19th century, settlers moved to the South Cherokee Territory en masse and wanted their government representatives to claim the land. An Indian reservation is a particular area just for the Native Americans. They are legal, non-independent countries, belong in the United States. Indians can only give up their lands and get money from U.S. government. They cannot trade lands with single U.S. citizen or foreign country. The red area is the Indian countries, and the pink one is the United States of America in 1834. The brown one was a territory by the United States at that time. But right now, the Indian reservations are located on the green areas that separate in the United States. At the beginning of the 1830s, about 125,000 Native Americans lived on the land in Georgia, North Carolina, and Florida, the lands that their ancestors had occupied and cultivated for generations. By 1838, only about 2,000 Cherokees had left their Georgia homeland for Indian Territory, thus looted their home and belongings. Then they marched the Indian more than 1,200 miles to Indian Territory. Whooping cough and starvations were epidemic along the way, and historians estimate that more than 5,000 Cherokees died as a result of the journey. By the end of the decade, very few natives remained anywhere in the southeastern United States, working on behalf of white settlers who wanted to grow cotton on the Indians' land. The federal government forced them to leave their homeland and walk thousands of miles to a specially designated Indian Territory across to the Mississippi River. This difficult and sometimes deadly journey is known as the Trail of Tears. Later generations thought this event is Trail of Blood and Death.
The Indian Removal Act was signed by President Jackson in 1830. The act allowed the government to divide land west of the Mississippi to give Indian tribes something in exchange for the land they'd lost. The government helped Native Americans resettle and covered the costs. The Indian Removal Act was controversial. However, Jackson argued that it was the best option for Indians in order to sustain their way of life. After a review of life on Indian reservations, the Indian Reorganization Act was set in place. It was severely detrimental to Native Americans. It replaced the Indian Reorganization Act with the goals of restoring Indian culture and returning surplus land to tribes. It also encouraged tribes to self-govern and write their own constitutions and provided financial aid for reservation infrastructure. Modern Indian reservations still exist across the United States, falling under the umbrella of the BIA, or Bureau of Indian Affairs. The tribes on each reservation are sovereign, meaning they are not subject to federal laws. They depend on the federal government for financial support. On many reservations, the main source of revenue is tourism and gambling, however. According to the BIA, 567 federally recognized American Indian tribes reside in the U.S. The BIA is responsible for improving quality of life and providing economic opportunities and improving assets. Despite these efforts, living conditions on reservations aren't ideal and are often compared to that of a third world country. Housing is overcrowded and often below standards. Many people on the reservations are stuck in a cycle of poverty. As a result, despite the Indian health services, which are practically non existent, many Native Americans die from lifestyle related diseases such as heart disease and diabetes. Additionally, infant mortality rates are significantly higher for Indians than for whites, as well as alcohol and drug abuse. A look towards the future. Reparations are one solution to oppressive indigenous land rights in California. More than 250 tribes have some assets held in trust by the federal government. The U.S. government must make sure that tribes receive just compensation for the use of their land and resources. In 2012, Obama granted American Indians $3.4 billion. The agreement calls for $1.5 billion distributed amongst those part of the lawsuit. Another $1.9 goes into a land consolidation program allowing people to sell fractions of the land that they own.
Before we end, there are 2 discussion questions we left for you. And this is our works cited. That's it. Thank you for watching and peace!